Welcome to Fighting Words, spiritual sparring for rank-and-file believers. I'm Brother Logan, Director of Education for the Hospitallers of St. Martin and co-creator of Gruntworks. Each week, I march us through the Sunday lectionary readings, dragging biblical interpretation back to rank-and-file believers where it belongs. Sometimes, I also interview companions along the way who are engaged in their own wrestling match with the Word. Thanks for joining us. Let's get it on. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 4a. And Yahweh said to Abram, "Go forth out of your land, and out of your country, and out of the house of your father, and come into the land which I'll show you. And I'll make you a great nation, and I'll bless and magnify your name. And you shall be blessed. And I will bless those that bless you, and curse those that curse you. And in you all the tribes of the earth shall be blessed." And Abram went as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot departed with him. Psalm 121. I lifted up my eyes to the mountains, from which my help comes. My help shall come from the Lord, who made the skies and the land. Don't start to relax and hope your protector isn't asleep on the job. Luckily, Israel's protector doesn't slack or slumber. The Lord will protect you. Let the Lord shield your right hand. The sun will not burn you by day, nor the moon by night. May the Lord protect you from all isolation. The Lord shall protect your soul. The Lord shall protect your coming in and your going out from this time and forevermore. Romans chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. For the promise to Abraham and to his descendants that he would inherit the world wasn't through Torah, but through the righteousness of faith. For if those who are of Torah are heirs, faith is made void, and the promise is made meaningless. For Torah produces wrath, for where there is no law, there can be no disobedience. That's why it depends on faith, so it may be according to grace, and the promise may be for all offspring, not only those of Torah, but also of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many peoples. And that was in the presence of Abraham, the believer. God gives life to the dead and speaks of things that are not as though they were. The Gospel of John, chapter 3, verses 1 through 17. Now there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. He came to Joshua by night and said to him, "Professor, we know that you're a teacher come from God, for no one can do these proofs that you do unless God is behind them." Joshua answered him, "You're right. That's why I've said, unless one is made anew, he can't see God's republic." Nicodemus said to him, "How can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be made?" Joshua answered, "I'm telling you, unless someone is made of body and breath, they can't be members of God's republic. That which is born of the body is bodily. That which is born of the breath is spiritual. Don't be surprised that I've said you must be made anew. The Spirit blows where it wants to, and you hear its sound, but don't know where it comes from and where it is going. That's what it's like with someone who's born of the Spirit." Nicodemus answered him, "How can these things be?" Joshua answered him, "How are you a teacher of Israel and don't understand these things? Everyone can tell. We say our theories out loud and publicly testify what we have seen, but you don't receive our testimony. If I told you scientifically proven things and you don't believe, how will you believe if I theorize for you the things of heaven? No one has ascended into heaven who hasn't already been there. The Son of Man, other than the Son of Man, who according to the prophet Daniel is in heaven. Just as Moses lifted up the snake pole in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not spoil, but be renewed and ripened. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in that as a scientific fact should not fall off the vine, but remain good fruit forever, for all generations. For God didn't send their heir into the world to reign from on high, but that the world be able to look upon a ruler and find love." Hey, welcome to Fightin' Words. This is Brother Logan Isaac broadcasting from the Chapter House in Albany, Oregon. Had a brain fart there. This morning's readings come to us from Genesis 12, Psalm 121, Romans 4, and John 3. This is Lent 2, or the second Sunday after Lent. And there's an alternate reading of Matthew 4, but we've already covered it in different weeks, so I use John here. And that's part of why the annual cycles, there's only 3 years in the Revised Common Lectionary. 3 Gospels that are followed are Matthew, Mark, and Luke in that order, A, B, and C. And then John, the 4th Gospel, gets scattered in amongst the rest like a seasoning. You kind of get the sense why here, because John is doing some stuff that is making some really bold claims that the other authors, the other Gospels, leave off the table. John is known as the spiritual gospel and his symbol as an evangelist is an eagle because he flies high. And he almost didn't make it into the canon, but it was hard to dismiss it. I'm sure it existed in whole form. I'm sure it had a community that supported its inclusion in the canon. But that community is like, the guys are off in the corner doing shrooms, and they're like pointing out all these things that like other people are just contrasted with Mark, who's very like bodily urgency. This is happening now, writing during the destruction of the temple, of Herod's temple. John is up in the clouds, daydreaming. And it also happens that the tradition that we've received is that the author of this gospel is the same person who is the youngest of the disciples, the called and the sent of Jesus. He's the youngest disciple, follower, pupil of Jesus. And he claims pretty explicitly to be that same person. Later he talks about like racing Peter to the tomb, and it's very tongue-in-cheek because at that point in history it's very easy to accuse someone of narcissism. Easy because there's a cultural taboo around talking about yourself. Don't tell that to Augustine a couple of centuries later. But anyway, and in this gospel, I think it's the most important. The Genesis reading is really brief, and it points out Abram, and it uses the language of ethnos, and in Hebrew, am, which I've used as the people, like we the people, in contrast to goy and goyim, which is all people, like every human being, but not just like in abstract, but which would be anthropos, but like all the human beings collectively would be something like goyim. Anyway, and then the psalm, we have shamar, which is protector. I use that repeatedly and explicitly to rehabilitate the serve and protect language. If you haven't read my Joshua chapter in Grunt God, I really encourage you to read that. All of the sub-chapters around, you can buy that, you can buy the icon. But what's really important is what Saul, also known as Paul, his Latin name is Paul, his Hebrew name is Saul or Shaul. What he's doing in Romans 4 and what John is doing in chapter 3 are very important that they're linked, and the people who created the RCL, the Revised Common Lectionary, probably knew that. And Saul is doing some highfalutin theology. He's very sympathetic to the Johannine community in that he sees a sharp contrast between the Jews who are still believing in Torah and Abram and Moses in a certain kind of way, and this new movement that was started within the Jewish community, but which is clearly exceeding the Jewish community. And Saul is trying to make sense of that. In Romans, he talks about, look, Abraham, if you think you're an inheritor of Abraham because of your blood, think of what that does to Torah. Think about what that does to God's work to produce Torah and the prophets. But also, if you think only his blood, literally his semen, in Greek it's sperma, which is translated descendants. If you have to be related to Abraham by blood, the whole promise is meaningless, because it isn't to everybody, it's just to a few people. But, and this is where Saul does some really incredible hermeneutics, he says, but look at the text. He says, or God says to Abram, I've made you a father of many peoples. And what that does, Saul says, is in Romans 4, is that is the substance of the promise. That Abram, as Abram, within the story, not just his sperm, not just his blood, but his, you might even say, the Johannines might say, and they do, the breath. Breath comes in and goes out, doesn't belong to anybody. That's like what the Spirit is. So if you are a descendant of Abraham by your breath, by the wind, which are all the same words in Hebrew, ruach. The breath goes in, the spirit goes in, the spirit goes out. Nobody gets to track it. Nobody gets to own it. That's what makes God's political entity a republic, a public thing, res publica, a thing that is public. Political power, if it has the authority of the spirit, of the breath, you can't contain it, you can't keep it. It belongs to all people, even the Goyim, even the Gentiles. And that's the move Saul is making. He says, I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews. I studied under Gamaliel. I've got Roman citizenship. I keep hitting the microphone. And this is what that experience has taught me to say. And now I have to say it. And that's why it's important in John, when Joshua, the Christ, who we call Jesus, but his English name is Joshua, he uses this image. He talks about body and breath, the carnal, the flesh, and then breath here again is the same breath, wind, spirit are all ruach and are all pneuma in here. And there's one moment where we get the Greek word for wind that is not pneuma. But for the most part, Jesus, through John, is holding them all at once. Breath, spirit, wind are all the same thing. They are of God. And if you think that you can if you can put it in an empty jar, mason jar, you're going to kill that breath. You're going to die. Remember, the Hebrew imagination is agrarian. It's semi-sedentary in that Abraham was called to be a nomad, but it is also sedentary in the tribes and settling in the land. That's the promise, is we won't have to wander forever, that we will settle. And when we settle, the promise lives on. And John and Saul and Jesus are all kind of singing in harmony this story, this proof of God that says, look, if you think that you can only do one, you can only embody your carnal appetites, or you're only a body, they're all saying, no, part of you is the body. You also have to recognize and take ownership of the thing that you can't possess, the spirit, the breath, the thing that belongs to everybody, whether that's authority or meaning or language or whatever. It has to be both. You cannot have just one, otherwise you're going to kill it. You're going to spoil and you're going to fall off the vine. And so the last point I want to make is there's a specific image that Jesus uses here from Numbers 21. And I added as a reference, like the Son of Man language comes from Daniel, which is an intertestamental text. So Jesus, it would have been fresh in their minds, like the Maccabees. But he goes on in verse 14, he says, as Moses lifted up, and I called it the snake pole. In Numbers 21, God sends a bunch of snakes to bite the people and afflict them, just like a plague. And to heal them, God says, make a brazen serpent. And in the Hebrew, to nahesh is taking a snake, which is nephet, I think, but there's a wordplay going on. Make the snake solid and brass, which is a flagpole. Do two symbols in one, a straight, dead metal pole, and then put at the top of it a hardened serpent figure. And you can see when you play with the languages a little bit, in the Hebrew, they're doing this thing. They're saying, remind people that the snake is dead. The thing that bit you has been rendered useless. It has become bronze or fixed. In Greek, it's typically translated graven or graven image, but it's like construct this thing, fix it in time, make it straight so it can't slither on the ground. And anybody who looks on those and contemplates the meaning of that will be healed. And they are. It's this miraculous thingy. Even the sign language of Shimeon, which was used in Mark, or used as Mark, as in a mark of Cain. It's a proof. This is a sign, a proof, a wonder, a Shimeon that this snake, the snake has been conquered. The snake has been reduced to a fixed form that cannot hurt you. Remember, if you have to, look upon it and remember that God is your protector from the Psalm, and that God has ordered all things, and the snake is below you. If you ever have to, crush its head with your heel. All of these images and turns of phrases are all swimming in this kind of harmonic ocean, doing this work together. And that's where I love the lectionary style, where there are set texts that may have been collected together, but the invitation of the RCL, which I don't do, but I invite you to do, is to make meaning of that in real time. We're all going through time together, and the RCL is this 3-year cycle that we can use to remember our history, to remove our agency a little bit. Somebody else chose these texts long ago, but to remain connected to these communities that produce these images and meanings and signs and symbols and things, because that's what it means to believe. It doesn't require one prescribed set of, it's like the breath. If you need to hold it in a bottle, and if you think you have the only way, it's going to die. Watch how it dies. Watch the temple get destroyed. Watch the pedophile scandal in the Catholic Church. Watch the megachurch bullshit in non-denominational circles. Like, as soon as you try and capture it, you can be sure it will die. As soon as you think you can wrap your mind around it with certainty, you will die. Your thing will die. The thing that you made will die. But the thing that God makes, the thing that the breath makes in one, by unifying the flesh and the spirit, or the breath as one, that thing will surely last forever. Not as some like promise of I'm going to live forever in some heaven, but like you will always be a good fruit to others. People will always be looking to you to help make sense of turbulent times, because you will be a good fruit, which is exactly what God does. God makes you to be good for others, just like God makes food for us to eat. Well, them's fighting words for this week. Support Gruntworks on Venmo with username PewPewHQ, or visit pewpewhq.com/TFW to collaborate, send prayer requests, or read more of the Fightin' Word, my exegetical project centering rank and file believers. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, or if you're on Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and a review. Thanks for federating the faith with me. This has been Brother Logan. Semper Fam.